Hi and welcome. This is Stories Build Businesses, the show that proves your story isn't just something to tell, it's the strategy that builds a business that's uncopyable, unforgettable, and unmistakably you. I'm your host, Megan Wright, story and strategy coach, and today we're exploring what it really means to build with care. You'll probably know by now that story is at the heart of everything that I do. But before we can use story in a strategic way, before we even think about connecting and creating, we have to begin with care. Care isn't just the first part of my framework, it's the foundation that the rest of it sits on. Because if you don't build with care, you're building on really shaky ground. And I say that as somebody who's spent nearly 15 years surrounded by conversations about mental health and well-being, sometimes professionally, sometimes personally, and honestly, sometimes painfully. I've seen what happens when care is missing. People burn out, they lose faith in their work, or they build something that looks really successful on the outside, but quietly is breaking them on the inside. And I've seen what's possible when care is built in from the start. When someone chooses to work slower, to hold their boundaries, to build something that feels safe enough to stand on, that kind of care doesn't just protect you, it changes everything you create. It makes your whole business feel calmer, clearer, and more intentional, and safer for other people to engage with. So when I say build with care, I'm talking about structural care, the kind that shapes how you make decisions, how you communicate, and how you show up both for yourself and for the people that you support. Because the truth is, story can only land when there's a space for it to land in. Care didn't start for me as a business principle. It started as survival. In the final year when I was at university, I saw people I loved struggling deeply with their mental health. It was a time when those conversations weren't mainstream, when phrases like burnout and self-care weren't part of the everyday language. That experience became a quiet undercurrent that shaped literally everything that I've done in my life since. When I went into teaching, I realized I was far more interested in my students' well-being than in lesson plans or Ofsted inspections. The questions that mattered to me most weren't, did you meet the objective, but are you okay? And that awareness, that human first instinct, has never really left me. Eventually, I retrained as a CBT practitioner and spent a few years delivering one-to-one support, coordinating wellbeing services, and helping people make sense of the challenges they were facing and the things that they had been through. It was the kind of work that was often under the surface, built on trust, and a lot to do with the stories that people had lived through. Through all of that, one thing became really clear to me. Lived experience changes the level of care you can offer. And when you build with care in mind, you do things like you plan for pauses, you notice what's not being said, you build from a place of empathy rather than assumption. Listening to hundreds of people's stories taught me that care isn't theoretical, it's essential. It's the quiet moments, it's noticing, listening, and holding space responsibly. Every story you hear and every story that you share deserves that same level of respect and responsibility. Storytelling has always been how I made sense of life, even before I worked in business. It's how I processed things through writing and reflection and trying to find meaning in experiences that didn't make sense at the time. So when I entered the online business space, it felt really natural that story would play a big role for me. But what I found was really different from what I'd seen in wellbeing. Story was everywhere, but safety was nowhere. People were being told to share their truth for engagement, turn trauma into marketing, and to use vulnerability as some kind of proof of authenticity. And I just remember thinking, this isn't story, this is exposure. That was a moment when I realized that storytelling and creating stories isn't automatically healing. It's not automatically connecting. It's the way we hold and share stories that determine whether they help or they harm. Because storytelling without care becomes performance, but storytelling with care becomes connection. Building with care means asking, why am I sharing this? I want the listener to feel or take away. And do I have the capacity to hold the response that might come back? Stories need to be processed privately before they're ever shared publicly. Some are better told in conversation than on a carousel. And honestly, some don't need to be told at all. Setting boundaries around what you share is a form of care. Because when you honor your own readiness, you also model that for your audience. You show them that boundaries and honesty can coexist and that you can be open without feeling overexposed. So that's why in my world, build with care isn't just self-care, it's structural care. It's the scaffolding that's going to keep you safe as you grow. It's the pacing, the planning, the systems that are going to protect you, your energy, and your integrity. So what does that actually look like practically? For me, it comes down to 3 layers. Care for yourself, care for others, and care for the work itself. Care for yourself is quite often the part that people skip unless they're forced to stop and do it. It's about capacity and boundaries, knowing when to rest, when to delegate, and when to slow down. Not as a nice to have, but as essential maintenance. Because the way you treat yourself sets the tone for how you're going to be able to show up for everybody else. And that doesn't mean that building with care means that you can never stretch yourself. It just means recognizing the difference between stretching and straining, so that when you plan launches, offers, or visibility, it's around your natural rhythms, not somebody else's calendar. You stop fighting against your capacity and start respecting it and working with it. Care for others is about presence and responsibility. It's remembering there's a human being on the other side of your marketing, your content, your offers. It's asking yourself, how will this make them feel? Not just, will this make them buy? It's designing your work so people can enter it safely and leave feeling that they were well held. It also means communicating with empathy, because urgency and scarcity might convert in the short term, but care creates customers for life. When you lead with care, you become the person that people trust. And finally, care for the work itself. This is the one that often falls by the wayside when people get busy, because this is working on your business rather than in it. It's the slow, behind-the-scenes, deliberate work that ensures your business can grow. When you build with that care, you're not just protecting your well-being, you're protecting the integrity of your story, your audience, and your business. And over time, that integrity becomes your reputation. People start to associate you with reliability and warmth and thoughtfulness. They feel safer in your spaces, and that safety becomes the thing that differentiates you. Because in a world built on noise, care is quietly radical. Now, here's the hard part. Care isn't always comfortable. It sounds easy to do nothing and to pause, but it's hard to pause when everyone else is sprinting. It's hard to hold your boundaries when shortcuts are tempting. Building with care means knowing that slower doesn't mean smaller, it means stronger. And sometimes care will cost you opportunities. It'll cost you clients that want quick results or constant access. It might cost you visibility because you refuse to share more than feels safe. But what it will give you is longevity. It'll give you trust that builds quietly and stays. It'll give you the connection between what you say and what you do. And when you look back years from now, the moments you'll be most proud of won't be the spikes in engagement or the sudden sales days. They'll be the choices where you put care first, where you said no to something that didn't feel right, when you took a break instead of pushing through, and when you stuck to your values, even when it would have been easier not to. Those are the moments that build your legacy. I want to leave you with a question, a bit of a challenge. Take a moment today and think about it. Where does care already exist in your business? And where could a little bit more care make things feel steadier, either for you, your clients, or even your future self? Because it might be a boundary that you've been worried about enforcing, might be a system you've been avoiding fixing, or it might simply be the way that you speak to yourself on the days when things don't go to plan. If this resonated, I'd love you to share the episode with somebody else who'd love it, and come and tell me over on Instagram at Stories Build Businesses. I'll see you next time.